What do you see in the next 5, 10, 15 years for the Mongolian Church?
I think it's going to explode. They have this history with Genghis Khan, and so they've got this sense of, we've been all over the world, and so now let's go back, not to build a human empire, but to build God's kingdom. You feel like you're at the end of the earth here. They have every reason to say, we're just going to be isolated and stay home and think about ourselves, but they don't, it's just the opposite.
Radstock exists to equip and engage local churches to start new local churches in the world's toughest places. Find out more at radstock.org.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Radstock Missions podcast. I'm Steve Palframan.
I'm Brian Jose.
Great. Brian, we're sitting in Mongolia.
We are.
Although you probably can't really tell from our surroundings. Mongolia, 1990, no church at all. Communism Falls, there's very few believers. I think the only people who knew the gospel had heard it somewhere else by travelling out of the country and travelling back in. What's the situation today?
Yeah, I was here in 91 and I saw that, just 2 churches then. And now today, people are saying maybe 150 churches, sometimes more, maybe 35,000 believers. Some people say a lot more, but let's be conservative and put it that way.
We've been here, 10 days? Pretty encouraging in terms of what's going on.
Yeah.
Highlights for you?
Probably down in the Gobi Desert, seeing how one church there over the years has planted 20-some churches and dotted some of them in buildings, some of them in remote villages, some in ger churches in the yurts, the tents that the nomads live in. And just seeing the gospel really go to the ends of the earth it's just amazing.
There's the real, talking to the church leaders, there's a real missions mindset, isn't there? There's not a, hey, come and do our missions for us, but a real, let's go tell.
Sacrifice is just part of who they are, it seems like. And we met that lady in that little church mostly of women, and tough living there, and running her little shop that sold everything from spark plugs to ladies' smalls to ice creams to...
I sadly didn't get to go into that shop.
Oh, you didn't? No. Okay. It was amazing. There was everything in there.
And she was importing that from China and using the money to support.
I think 4 times a year she went, brought stuff back. I think it was, I don't know how long the trip is, more than a day, I think, to get there. And but as soon as she opened the door, the people sort of came in and 3 or 4 people bought things, and that's how she scrapes by, really. Because she's got a calling to be there for God's work.
What I think was most moving about her testimony was seeing how she just stood for the gospel amongst the opposition. So that even in a small church, in a very isolated place, false teaching had arrived, and she had remained faithful for Jesus only. It was really moving to see her.
I always think of the New Testament when I meet those people, because we know about these issues from those things actually happening, in New Testament times. And so it's not a surprise, always discouraging in a sense, but like you say, encouraging on the other hand to see her not wavering, but standing firm and saying, no, we're going to go back to the scriptures and see what it really teaches, and not be swayed by someone with a bit of cash or a bit of influence or a bit of political prowess or power in the town, really.
What do you think? So we're nearly 30 years since the fall of communism and Mongolia opening up. What do you see in the next, 5, 10, 15 years for the Mongolian Church?
I think it's going to explode. Who knows? God knows these things, but the passion, the vision they've got, especially to be reaching out around their own nation, and anybody looks at a map and thinks about, okay, who are those people groups surrounding them, and how many of those are on the unreached people groups lists that you see. And then you talk to people here and you hear, oh, I've been there, I've been researching there, I'm praying about this, we've sent somebody there, working on visas to get to another place. And they have this history with Genghis Khan, and so they've got this sense of, we've been all over the world, and so now let's go back, not to build a human empire, but to build God's kingdom. It's It's pretty fascinating, actually. I don't think I've ever seen a place that had that mixture of, low income and poverty, really, in some cases, in the same global vision, because you feel like you're at the end of the earth here.
Yeah.
They have every reason to say we're just going to be isolated and stay home and think about ourselves, but they don't. It's just the opposite. And what did you think?
I was thinking about. I was amused by the comment from someone at our round table, which was saying what we really need to do with Mongolians is rein them in, because they just really want to go, and they'll go without any support or any real kind of connections with local churches that are going to support them. And just thinking how massively different is that to our problem. We can't even get people to move 10, 15 miles down the road to join another church plant where there are schools and everything, But they're like, please don't move across the borders just yet, because we're not quite sure how you're going to be supported. I mean, that kind of let's go, let's do it attitude was. And
the support numbers are so low too by our standards. I mean, you hear them say, to go to, I won't name the place, but to go to some, forbidden place to give some training to some secret churches. We need $500 for a trip. You think, it's just nothing by our standards.
What do you think? So if I'm a church pastor in a church in the US, Canada, UK, listening to this, thinking, wow, that's incredible. What sort of things both should I be praying for the Mongolian Church, and what could I do? Is there anything that I could do beyond praying to support the work here?
I used to go to Albania way back, sort of in the bleak times, and I learned from another pastor, always go in the winter when it's miserable and they're cold and it's dark and grim, because he said, I just want them to know that we haven't forgotten and that I came.
Okay.
And I've heard that so much. Brian, you've come over and over. And I think that, if I'm a pastor in one of those countries you mentioned, I'm going to think, who can I connect with? Yeah, and I will sacrifice. I'll make a flight once a year, but I'll come and I'll come and I'll come, not just once, not just so I can go home and tell the church, but just to say to these guys, I'm here, I'm present. How's your walk with God? Let me sit for a day or two in your home and pray with you, and get your leadership team around, and let's talk together about what's going on in your church and your mission. And maybe you don't have all the answers. You won't have all the answers, frankly. Sure, but you've come. And I think in these isolated frontier type situations, that's probably more powerful than we can ever imagine, because we're not used to that, because we can go to 100 conferences and meet 100 different pastors easily. But that's not always the luxury here.
I was surprised by that a little bit when we were traveling around. Was it last week now? I think it was. We were traveling around. I think you asked the question, do you get many foreign visitors? And they said, oh, no, we get some visitors from other churches in Ulaanbaatar, but foreigners never come here. And thank you so much for coming. It's been a real encouragement to see you. Yeah, always impressed.
It's one of the things when you read between the lines, or even just read carefully in the New Testament, you see there was a ministry of encouragement going on all the time. Their cloaks were being taken and cash was being taken, and Paul was sending people here and there. The letters themselves, of course, were to teach and encourage. So it's a ministry I think we can overlook sometimes.
Yeah, sure. You said today to our Mongolian brothers and sisters who are leading churches here, you were saying asking a Western pastor to come is like asking them to visit the moon. But it's not quite like that, is it? It's actually probably easier than you think to get here.
Yeah, and I've been surprised. People got here, some fares for under $700 US from the United States, and so it's not that expensive. It's a few hours in the air, that's for sure. But once you're here, you might have to squat over an outdoor toilet occasionally. But Jesus probably did that a few times if we think about it, and it's not too much to ask, surely.
Yeah. So visiting is one thing. Anything else you think?
I think as if you have experience in mission, we heard some of the issues they're feeling as sort of new first generation missionaries, and I'm sitting here as sort of an old gray beard that, oh boy, I've been through that. I've taught about that. We can train them in that.
Yeah.
So I think there are reasons or opportunities for specific kinds of training. I said to to our host last year when I was here, hey, I'm kind of afraid to send people to come in case we mess this thing up. Because I said, some things you don't need to learn from us. And I said, maybe you should come and train us. He said, yeah, that's probably not a bad idea on some aspects. So, but I think that personal relationship between a couple of churches and then thinking through how you can open doors. Another thing that came up was for some of these pioneer missionaries that they're sending, people with trades, electricians, carpenters, plumbers, who can come and give an intensive crash course, 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, because often these people go to kind of frontier places, and if they can repair old broken windows or do some electrics, that's how they survive, because they're not going on full missionary support like we're perhaps used to, but they're going really in faith, saying we'll be bivocational, we'll be tent makers, and to give them a practical trade that's just basic. It's not how to wire a whole house. It's just how can I, when the electric socket's not working, when something goes wrong. So it's a great way for tradespeople to actually have a direct impact in church planting in pioneer countries, which is something that probably the average plumber doesn't think is his thing, but he can have a direct impact that way.
Yeah, for sure. There's a slight different feel to Ulaanbaatar to the rural areas, isn't it? It's definitely a big contrast.
Yeah, half the country's here, 3 million people, half of them live here, more or less.
It's amazing, isn't it? And it's expanding all the time. I mean, traveling around today.
And, you see Benetton and all the other sort of corporate names are here, as well as lots of Mongolian.
We've just eaten burgers in a very Western type restaurant.
Yeah, lots of sushi on the menu there.
Yeah. And I think we were hearing today, and I can't remember exactly the numbers, but it's a really young city, so it's full of young people. We've been the oldest people in some of the restaurants that we've sat in.
Definitely.
And so there's another ministry there which looks a little bit more like some of the things going on in the other big cities in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, there's certainly
student ministry.
If you sort of just videoed from the shoulders down, everybody's walking around holding their smartphone, just like you're in London or New York or Toronto or Milan or anywhere in the world, really. So there's that whole globalization thing going on, which will and is for sure changing the urban culture.
So, I mean, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it, to see short-term teams of young people coming here to do things with the young people in the church. I think that's a new aspect to the life and ministry of the church here in Utah.
And we heard today at the round table, didn't we? Like last summer, an English camp, just a couple of people came from the United States, I think it was, and they've still got 27 people meeting every week. It's not quite a church; it's an embryonic sort of church, but it's a group of 27 people, none of whom came to that camp saying they were believers, but who've all said, I want to explore this thing, and some of whom are identifying now as Christians, as baby Christians. So that's another thing churches can do, to send a short-term team that links up with an English camp, because of this globalization, English, of course, is the language everybody's trying to learn.
Yeah. Now, this is the Radstock Mission podcast, right? So there's a Radstock flavor to this, which means, tell us a little bit about the Radstock connection. So we're not just trying to send missionaries in here. We're trying to connect churches together. How many member churches? What are those churches like in Mongolia? Can you give us a feel for Radstock in Mongolia?
I guess there's we got 3 new members yesterday who sort of sat in a sort of shop window day and decided, this is what we want to be part of, because we got a passion for mission and we want to connect with other churches within and outside Mongolia. So I guess now we're up to about 34 something churches here in Mongolia, member churches. Most of those in the Gobi Desert, and then a handful here in the capital and dotted around not too far, sort of distant from the capital. So most of them smaller churches. I guess some would be 7 or 8. The biggest ones, I suppose, would be 150, something like that. And but the thing in common they all have is this passion to duplicate, to multiply, to keep evangelizing and seeing new churches planted, really. all indigenous leadership. No missionary sort of led churches. There's been some missionary involvement from Korea and the States and UK, of course, here. But also, I just heard that the average missionary only stays here for 3 years. Some, of course, have given their lives and stayed a long time. But that's one thing that's striking to me, having lived in Albania, and that's a big difference. There's just far fewer missionaries and far more sort of necessity for indigenous leadership, indigenous strategy, indigenous solutions to funding, all those kinds of issues.
Which just means that church-to-church connection is so much more important, isn't it? I mean, it's always important, but just seeing that it's not really possible to send individual missionaries in that way. But if we, through the network, you can connect churches with one another, to pray with one another, to send short-term teams to get to know and build relationships, that's key to encouragement
and
work.
Both inside and outside the country, depending on where we're talking about, there are for sure opportunities for multinational church planting teams, particularly in big cities, because of security issues. I think if you're in more rural areas, that would be difficult for Westerners to be part of those kinds of teams. But in cities, I think there are options for that to happen, really. Yeah. And for, we heard today again too, didn't we? And yesterday too, just a plea really for mentoring and so experienced pastors and Christian workers have something to offer here, just in terms of a mentoring thing that over time has to start face to face, but can include things like online and Skype type connections that keep it fresh and more frequent.
Yeah, there's definitely a hunger, isn't there? So I'm trying to think. That was one of the words that we were using after visiting one of the Ger churches. Just there's a real thirst and desire for teaching and input and encouragement and training and.
When we talked about our academy that we've been doing in Europe, they jumped on that idea. We need that. We need and leadership, all kinds of leadership training. They're saying so. Again, but I'm really convinced, and I'm sure you're the same, that this works best in long-term relational context and church partnership context, so that there's a continuity and a mutual understanding there.
Yeah, great. So, just to wrap it up. Mongolia, some massive encouragements.
Massive.
Huge growth, real mission heart, praise God.
Yeah.
Loads of work to do.
Yeah.
And loads of work to do, not just here, but from here to some of the tougher and more unreached parts of the world.
Toughest, the places that we've been talking about for 20, 30 years is who's going to go, who's going to be the how are we going to find a way to start the first churches in so many of these places and cities? And these guys have the passion.
Yeah, for sure.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, praise God. Thanks.
Thank you.